thank you for being here. I hope you find something familiar in this presentation. My name is Burr Stewart, and I have a water model railroad in my basement that I've been working on for 35 years. I thought it would be fun to share how I stay focused on it in the face of many distractions. And I got the idea for this because Rich Blake, who you may know is the head of the Wiki, fantastic color, he came up with a list of clinic ideas, all the different things people could be giving clinics on. And it's asking, I think they did a survey with that list saying, if you can give a clinic on any of these topics, let me know. And I looked at this list and I thought, well, each one of these things is a sub-hobby that you could spend months or years on. And so it's a good thing that we have each other to sort of learn from so that we don't all have to go through every single one of these topics and figure out how to do them. And, Bill Messicar is a great example. He's sitting in the back here, and he's really great at building structures, and I've learned a lot from just looking at his structures. And actually came and built a little structure for me, a couple of them that have really advanced my layout. And I think he's working on one for Bill Sorensen now too, right?
I finished it. It's a curved icing dock.
Icing dock.
Maybe crazy, but I got it done.
Right. So the key point is it made him crazy. And that's what this talk is about, is that one railroad can make you crazy if you don't stay focused. And it occurred to me to use the word triage, and we'll get to that in a second, to say, what's the right thing to be working on right now? But before I get that, let's just do a little bit of introduction here. What's wrong with this picture of me having fun? You know, my YouTube channel is called Much Fun with Trains. So in theory, I have much fun with trains. And as you can see, I'm taking a video of a really cool couple of locomotives, 3 pulling a train across a trestle. So what's wrong with the picture?
You're not
Just take a look at the picture. So first of all, we haven't ballasted the Argo yard yet, and that's been in operation for something like 10 years. What's wrong with that? The second thing is that there's a perfectly good sawmill up in Snoqualmie, which is just a piece of flex track. It's not even glued down, with a bunch of logs next to it, and we just sort of shove the empty log cars in there, throw the logs on and pull it out. And it's not, the track is not glued down, there's no details, there's no scenery. It's just a place where we load logs on log cars. Now, there's another structure here, which is a Walther's cement plant. And this is intended to replicate Lone Star Cement in South Seattle. And that thing I put together in maybe 2005. And it, without any detail, it's not finished. It's just the silos. And all I have to do is look at the silos and I go, cool, I got a cement factory. Now I have a bunch of very detailed weathered cement cars that go in and out of there. There's 4 tracks. But the building is not there. I'm just saying, what's wrong with the picture? Now, what the heck is that? That green thing is completely wrecking the picture, and it's a clip that I use for holding together all the car cards. Now, why do I have green clips? I should have black clips so that they don't screw up the picture. But I haven't gotten around to buying more of those little clips, black, and getting rid of all the colored ones. Now, this water underneath the Snoqualmie River Bridge here in Everett, this is the Delta Y in Everett. I tried pouring it with one of these fancy scenery products, and I got the first pour done, but it wasn't thick enough. So I started the second pour, and I didn't have enough material, so it went halfway down. So if you actually look under here, the water is like 2 different heights. You can't see it from this picture, but that's been driving me crazy. I did that, I think, 20 years ago, and I still haven't gotten around to getting another bottle of water and putting it in there. I don't remember if it was Realistic Water or whatever one. It wasn't Scenics product. Now, a few months ago, we noticed that the engines were stalling coming into the Delta Y. And I usually have guys come over once a week and play with the layout, and they would say, there's something wrong with that wiring. And I say, yeah, I know, there's something wrong with that wiring. And every week, Scott, it was Scott in the back row there, who was usually there, he would say to me, well, when are you going to fix that? I said, I don't know, we'll have to fix that soon. And this went on for about 2 months. And one day he said to me, when are you going to fix this? And I did actually get up and look at it and fix it. I can't remember anymore what I did. It took me about 10 minutes. Now, this piece of rolling stock is a boxcar lettered for the British Columbia Railroad, and Columbia is spelled wrong. I mean, it came from the factory spelled wrong. It's not Columbia, it's Colombia. And apparently the Latin American country is spelled different from British Columbia. And somebody in the supply chain got that wrong. Now, every time somebody comments on that, I think, I need to fix that.
No, it's a collector's item.
Yeah, it's a collector's item.
Yeah.
Now, over here, there's a piece of benchwork that supports the Limestone Junction branch of the Milwaukee. If you're familiar with that, it's kind of a cool little piece of railroading in the Pacific Northwest. And I didn't have room for it, but that didn't stop me. Dave Anker put together this Walther's flood loader, and we call that it's pretty close to what actually was there at Limestone Junction. They hauled limestone from the Cascade Mountains down to Bellingham. Milwaukee did. It was one of the few things they had going on here that made money, right? And so I thought, well, I can do this above my Skycomish staging yard if I just keep it to 4 inches. And I'll just slap it on there. So this is an angle bracket. Screwed to the wall, painted green so it blends in with the backdrop. But I still haven't attached this piece of plywood to the angle bracket. And I have the 2 pieces of plywood connected with a binder clip. So I'm having fun with trains, but these things are gnawing at me. So I showed this in the previous clinic, but the part of why, well, this is just why videos are so much fun. Me in the middle of the Interbay yard here. All in good fun for the train day to show off these diesels. In the background, you can see lots more diesels. We'll run those some other day. We just wanted to show you how much fun we have in the Interbay yard. Yeah, so we have a lot of fun in Interbay yard, and we'll run those other diesels some other day, right? But we're certainly not going to work on the layout. We're going to play with trains. That's what this is about. So anyway, I want to just talk about how can you possibly do it. Now, I noticed, I think it was in the recent issue of Model Railroad Planning that just came out, Model Railroad Planning 2024. There's an article by our friend South Olympia, who has that very fancy layout. What's his name? The OM30.
Lee Bishop.
Lee Bishop has an article in there, and he mentions what he always mentions if you ever talk to Lee Bishop, which is that he just tried to do something every day on the layout. And within 2 years, he had his layout finished. Now it's in a small bedroom and everything else. But his point was he got in the habit of doing something every day. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, is how do you do something like that? He's already covered it well, railroad planning, so I don't have to bother creating an article for that. But triage is deciding if it's urgent, important, or it can wait. And I know that triage is a much more serious thing if you're talking about death and destruction. But we're talking about model railroads here, and there are a lot of different choices we have. So here's an example of and you've seen this in your management consulting seminars that some of you may have been to, the matrix between urgent, not urgent, and important and not important. And you obviously want to stay focused on what's important. And these are just some examples I thought of. So urgent and important is you just spilled a bottle of paint thinner on your workbench. If you've ever done that, and what you spilled wasn't paint thinner, but it was Tester's liquid cement for plastics.
So cool.
And in my case, not only it was on my workbench, but it spilled onto the floor. So it emptied, and it was a brand new bottle, so it was highly toxic, odorous. And within about 20 minutes, my wife and I had to leave the house for 4 hours because the smell was so bad. And this is from the basement. I opened all the windows, turned on the fans, blah, blah, blah. And I mopped it all up, and I took the mops, I did everything I could to get rid of it. This little bottle just completely got us out of the house. Now that was both urgent and important that we clean that up and deal with it. Now, on the other hand, not urgent but important is every 5 years you have to replace the cell battery, coin battery in your DCC command station. I don't know if you knew that, but cell batteries don't last forever. If you don't replace it, you lose all the memory of all the constants. Now, if I only have 2 constants, that's fine. But I have 70 working locomotives on the railroad that are all in 2 and 3 locomotive constants. So I do not want to lose that data, or I'm in for a 4-hour project of reconsisting everything. So I started DCC right after the NMRA convention in 2004. And guess what that means? Every 5 years, I've replaced my coin battery in my DCC system. This is 2024. So I need to do this year. I'm not going to do it today because I'm here. But one of these days, soon, I need to get this done. We're not talking, it's not urgent, but it is important that I do that, right? And you could argue it's not that important because I can always just waste a bunch of time putting it in. Now, in the category of not important and urgent is a vendor is having a locomotive sale today only. And so if you don't buy that locomotive today, you're not going to get in on that sale. Now, is it really important that I buy another locomotive? And then, of course, my personal favorite is I have a number of locomotives already. I don't need to buy more, but they don't have the latest decoders in them. Some of them don't have sound, some of them don't even have decoders. And so engines I bought 20 years ago, some of them are gorgeous, like some of the old Proto 2000 GP30s, I just love. And they're, I've got BN and NP and GN paint schemes, but they have non-sound decoders in them, so I need to do that. It's not urgent, and it's not important, because I have enough locomotives to run the railroad. But I like those locomotives. You got the idea, right? So this is a picture from the layout, and one day I was there and I reached over. We were running the Pacific Zip, which is the Burlington Northern's first intermodal train, and I reached over here to fix a derailment that was happening over there, and I accidentally hit my elbow on this car and it fell down. And I was about to grab it and pick it up, and I thought, wow, that is the coolest thing I ever saw. That was like a real accident that happened. Right? Somebody didn't tie it down properly. It fell off and went down a ravine. So there's a problem there. And do I stay? Do I stay or do I go? Is the question for that trailer. And it was in the middle of the operating session when this happened, so I wasn't going to spend a lot of time. Either was going to grab it or I was going to leave it. And so I chose to leave it. And actually, the funny backstory is, I thought, well, we would just leave this as a funny scene. And one of my friends comes along and says, I've never seen the underside of a trailer that wasn't dark weathered. So I said, okay, fine, take it home and weather it, if you care about it. So he did, so he picked it up, which I was planning not to do. So then when he brought it back weathered, I had to figure out how to put it there so it would stay. But anyway. So project management involves juggling scope, schedule, and budget. Hopefully you've all learned this in your jobs, if not on the railroad. But scope, schedule, and budget always are trading off against each other. And scope is kind of the givens and druthers. So if you run out of time and money, then you can always reduce your scope and say, I'm going to make the layout smaller. I've never heard anyone doing that. But seriously, I mean, which railroads, which era, which place, all of that stuff you can change. And then in schedule, how much are you going to work? And this is where we get to Lee's point about do something every day. I used to keep a log, and actually keeping a log is a good way to progress on your layout, just because it helps you focus on, oh, today I did this. And I have a log from the last 35 years of working on my log books of what I did. And one day I went through and I said how much time I spent on it in my entries. So I went through and just added it all up. And it turned out over a period of about 25 years, I spent an average of 2 hours per week working on the layout as well. Working full-time, having kids, all this other stuff you do. And I thought 2 hours per week doesn't sound like a lot, but when you come in the basement, you go, wow, this is an amazingly huge layout. And the reason is because 2 hours per week adds up over 35 years. And then, of course, on the budget side, the joke is that, well, it's cheaper than golf. I don't know. I don't play golf, but if you do, you can tell me. But I mean, the point is, but somebody had a good quote the other day, which is, all scales cost the same as whatever you can afford. So anyway, triage is what to work on right now. And I always love to make analogies back to running a railroad. So you have shippers, you transport to the yards, and then you transport to the destinations. It's a complex system doing all that. You have inputs, processes, and outputs in that kind of language. And of course, you have multiple sub-hobbies that are very tempting in the operations and in the design, and in my case, in the showing off, where I've gotten into videos and all this other stuff, which has nothing to do with design or operations. And then, you know, each one of these topics is very involved and involves a lot of learning curves. And the same is true with operations and maintenance. And the same is true of all the different ways you can show off your layout. And so my goal here is just to go through Rich Blake's list and show, just make jokes about all the different things you can get carried away with and how to keep focused and what I do to keep focused. Again, these are inputs, processes, and outputs for whatever that's worth. I really like this chart because it kind of gets at, you know, what are your goals? How do you deal with people? I mean, in model railroading, when you're playing with trains, are you bored, engaged, or overwhelmed? And all of these intermediate points are worth thinking about. You want to have some instruction, but not so much instruction in how to run the train that it's boring because you've laid out exactly how to do it. You want the operators to be interested, engaged, and challenged, and you don't want them overwhelmed, and you don't want them bored, right? I mean, it makes sense. Managing your ambition is one of the key things. So how much you want to do with limited time, space, and money works against the other curve, which is the likelihood of getting it done. So the more you want to do, the greater your ambition, the lower the likelihood of getting it done. And so you're looking for some sort of a sweet spot where you can do what you want to do, but you can limit what you want to do enough that you can actually do it. Kirk Reddy, who recently passed away, and incidentally, they're having an open house at his layout tomorrow from noon to 5, if anybody wants to go see his layout one last time. He said famously, building a model railroad requires both arrogance and humility, and knowing when to use them. Which I thought really fits in with this chart, because the arrogance is the ambition of how much you want to do, and humility is understanding that your time is limited, the number of friends you have is limited, and so forth. So my 3 keys is habits, deadlines, and restraint. And as all my friends will tell you, I have no restraint. Even though this is the most important answer. So I'll just talk about those 3, and then we can go through that list of topics. So one habit that I have is, if I put an engine on the layout, I make sure before I do that I've set the DCC settings in the decoder correctly. I've done some light weathering to it, and I've converted the coupler so that I don't have a pull apart from a cheap plastic coupler, which a lot of the engines come with cheap plastic couplers. And I put the Katie couplers on. And that takes a certain amount of time. I mean, I don't know how much, half an hour per engine or something? So I'm in the habit of buying 4 engines at a time. Well, that's a 2-hour commitment just to get them on the railroad. And, you know, not even to spend time asking the question of why did I buy these engines? And, you know, what am I going to do with them? Which also could take time, but that's something I do. And another habit relates to onboarding cars. And I just personally think that a car with silver shiny wheels does not look realistic. And Greg talked about this in the earlier clinic today. If you see a shiny wheel, it's going to make you think this is not a real railroad. So I always paint the wheel faces a rust color before I put the car on the layout, period. Now, there might be an occasional exception. And once in a while, I'm painting the faces and I get 3 of the 4 sides done, and then I later notice that there's a car that has silver wheels, but it takes a little time to do that too. You got to get the paint out, you got to find the right paintbrush, you got to stand there. I have a radio, so I can usually listen to the radio while I'm doing this tedious job. But it's an example of a habit. I'm just trying to say habits can help because it slows me down. It also backs up my onboarding of cars, so I don't tend to buy as many cars as I might because I know how much time it'll take me to get them on the layout. And of course, the coupler conversion, if needed, is something. And having a car card with a waybill is something. And all of that takes time. And it's a habit, so that I don't want to have a bunch of cars in the layout and no car card, because then everyone's going, what's this car doing here? I'm going, I don't know. It doesn't have a car card. It doesn't belong here. I've heard about labeling wires and storing electronics together. I've never done it. I've ever labeled a wire?
No.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, it's a really, really good idea. And I'm only doing it after the fact. So now when I go and spend 20 minutes trying to figure out where the wire is, after I've wasted that 20 minutes, I will spend another 5 minutes finding something to label it with and labeling it, because I don't want to do that 20 minutes again the next time I have a problem with that block. Now, I should have done it in the first place, I know. But I'm just saying these are habits. And I always loved sharing, Jim Vail was a famous HMN3 modeler who had a regular column in the Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette. And he had a series of articles on maintaining his layout, which I really enjoyed. But one of the things he did was every month was dedicated to a different car type. So January, he would go through all his 10 cars and make sure they all had coupler heights good, wheels good, and details fixed if there was a grab iron broken or something.
Yeah.
And then he would go into February and say, okay, let's do box cars. Then he would do the box cars in February. Then he would do March and say March is gondola cars. So as a result, as he got through the year, he had maintained his entire fleet of rolling stock. And that's another great example of a habit. And this, put tools away before starting the next project. I mean, this is the whole problem of spending, why spend 20 minutes finding where a wire goes when you could spend 20 minutes looking for a screwdriver? I mean, that is just a killer. And I'm just in the early stages of learning how to do this. But I've spent so much time looking for tools that I'm becoming, in my old age, more and more motivated to have a place for every tool and get it back there. This is a picture of an absolutely gorgeous BN era legacy caboose. And I'm just showing it to you because I want you to see how good it is to have the wheel not be shiny. That's all. We painted the rust is probably a little too brown. It should be a darker black, but that's all right. The second category is deadlines, and there are a lot of ways you can get deadlines. If somebody's coming over to visit, you got to clean up and get the junk out of the aisle. If there's publication deadlines, you've got to get that publication done. If somebody emails you with a request for information, you want to get back to them in a reasonable time, that creates a deadline. Sometimes if you're going to go on vacation, you want to get something finished before you go on vacation. And this is an example of a publication deadline. So if you want your railroad displayed in the NMRA annual calendar, you have to get it into them by, I think it's May, end of May. So one year I thought, this is ridiculous. I should have a picture in the NMRA calendar. So I took this, what I consider to be gorgeous picture of Inner Bay Yard with, and I did it with using Helicon Focus. So that I took about 15 pictures and the computer got all the focus right. So the car here is in focus and the backdrop is in focus 20 feet away and everything in between is in focus. And then I took Photoshop and I replaced the staircase down from the upstairs with a bunch of green that I saw. You can see I kind of half-assed made a field here instead of the ugly room, so you don't see the room. So anyway, I sent it in to the NMRA and said, here's a candidate photograph for you to publish. And they got back to me and said, we love your photograph, but it's tilted, it needs to be rotated about 4 degrees. And I had no idea how to rotate in Photoshop 4 degrees. Now, if you use Photoshop, you know how to do that. It's just that I didn't know how to do it, and I didn't have the courage to ask anybody to help me. So I missed the deadline, and that was like 3 years ago, and I still haven't gotten around to rotating that picture and sending it back in. And the guy who wrote me said he had volunteers that could do it. They didn't do it. They had plenty of pictures. But the point was that I worked on this because of the deadline. Once I missed the deadline, I was no longer motivated. So anyway, the last category is restraint, which for some of you may be easy, but for me it's a lifelong challenge. Reminding yourself of your Gibbons and Brothers. In my case, my list of Gibbons and Brothers is so long that I'm not sure how much this really helps me. But, you know, Milwaukee Road, I kind of give into that. I can't go into how bad I am at this. Avoid swap meets, magazine ads, and stores of any kind, because you're just going to get tempted. But actually, I'm going to start going to swap meets and trying to sell stuff because I really need to do that. But seriously, and I'll show a picture of this in a second, you can save a lot of time by going to swap meets and picking the right thing that somebody else built. And I'm selling it to you for $25 or whatever. Celebrating your ambitions with your achievements gets to a thing that I'd like to say, which is it's just as much fun to celebrate that you had something on your bucket list as it is to actually do the thing on your bucket list. I always wanted to hike the entire length of the Oregon coast ever since I was about 14 years old. I had the maps, the topographical maps. Well, I'm probably never going to hike the Oregon coast, but I get a huge thrill out of knowing that I wanted to. It was on my bucket list. And you can think of lots of things like that. Well, the same is true of model railroading. Proto 48. I mean, who doesn't want to do Proto 48? I mean, just go this afternoon, go down, if you don't know about it, go down and see Mike O'Connell's layout, and you'll say, I want to do that. I mean, just the sound coming out of his O-scale F units alone will just blow your socks off. Okay, so it's a little bit like missing deadlines, just forget about what you wanted to do. The storage of empty boxes is a real issue for HO scalers. Now, in scale, you can collect a lot of empty boxes and store them in the drawer and nobody will ever know. But the HO and O scale boxes are big enough that you have to figure out where to put them. And I have reached the point where my entire 2,500 square foot home is cubed out. Every square foot of the attic and the garage is full of boxes, of empty boxes of all these locomotives and cars that I've accumulated over 35 years. And there's now no longer any place to store anything. So whenever we have an operating session, I have to take all of the junk in the aisles in the basement up to my son's bedroom and store them there temporarily because my wife won't let me store them permanently there. And then when the operating session is over, we have to move all the junk back to the basement. Well, I've clearly got to do something about that. So I'm suggesting that letting the amount of cube available could be one way you could limit your purchases. This is all about restraint. So I'm now not buying cars because I don't know where I'm going to put the box. But that said,
Recycle.
that said, now, and of course we have the question of why do you need to keep a box, which is a good question. But the answer actually lies out there because they have a whole bunch of great rolling stock that somebody donated to them for sale. And it's all in the original box, and you can just look down there and see exactly what it is. You can open up and see that they did, in fact, weather it. So it's even better than what it says it is, but the point is, it's good to have those boxes. And actually, if you look at the back of the hall, there's a blue bag there. And I just purchased 4 more boxes.
Rule two.
Rule 2. Yeah, avoid swap meets or stores of any kind. The last tip I have is to limit sub-hobby digressions to 3 weeks or less. And the reason I made up this completely arbitrary 3 weeks number is that I got excited at one point about LCC, which, as you may know, is a new standard for layout command control based on the CAN bus, which is in every automobile. It's a very, very robust type of bus. And the idea was to offload communications on your DCC system by having a separate line with a very robust system that could control all of your other accessories. Great idea. So I bought all of the pieces necessary to set up an LCC system, which was about, what, $500 worth of circuits. And then I assembled it on some sort of a board and started playing with it. After 3 weeks of playing with this, and I'm looking at YouTube videos, I'm trying to get NMRA to work, even though I have a new operating system on computer, so I have to reload Java, which I don't even understand what Java is, but it's the Java model railroading interface. So finally, I was able to get a push button on one of my little gizmos to light an LED on a different gizmo after 3 weeks. I'm going, this is fantastic. You know, it took me 3 weeks to push a button and light an LED. And I thought, okay, 3 weeks. I'm done. I'm not gonna, the thought of getting it to do a more advanced signal after that, I thought that's gonna be another 3 weeks, and then another 3 weeks, and then it's gonna be, you know, next year. I'm just saying, it was fun to play with it, and I'm ready to use it when I really need to, and the pain is worse than the pleasure, or whatever the equation is. If you've got it, this is another version of restraint, really. You've got to say, I've spent enough time on this, I'm going to declare victory and move on, rather than I'm going to keep working on this until I get it done. Because if you do that, like I've done with YouTube videos, you never go back to your layout. You just keep making YouTube videos and your life gets away from you. Another way you can limit digressions is to manage the frequency of op sessions. If you have operating sessions, it takes a lot of preparation and time getting people lined up and communicating and everything. And so I try not to have too many. I mean, I could have an operating session every week, but I'm just not doing it. And actually, we just recently had the second Saturday Zoom, if any of you have watched that, by a guy named Jerry Boudreau from Dallas, Oregon. Did any of you see that? Really, really excellent clinic. Actually, 2 of them. Yeah. But he has a pretty good story in his operations clinic about how he realized that he needed to cut back from every 2 weeks to once a month. And so he had to reduce the number of people that could run in his layout, and they got really upset. They thought it was their right to run his layout, and he had no business reducing his frequency. So he was quite traumatized by how many friends he lost from reducing the frequency. So my approach to that is to never increase the frequency, keep it low, you know, because it is time consuming. And then, of course, the third one, which is very useful, is, and I mentioned already, is to hope to outsource tasks to people who know what they're doing instead of you getting on the learning curve and doing it yourself, which is another one of these limit ambitions thing, because I like to say, yeah, I can learn this, yeah, I can learn that, I can learn anything I want. Well, fine, yay me. But if we're going to get it done in my lifetime, maybe Lee knows how to do this way better than I do, and he can do it in 10 minutes, whereas it'll take me 10 days to figure out how to do it. This makes sense, right? Anyway, that's why we have the NMRA, so we can all get together and learn who each other is and who knows how to do what. Now, of course, procrastination has been a lifetime savior for me. Whenever you have something you want to do, if you put it off, there's at least a 50% chance you don't need to do it because somebody else will do it. Or some other thing will happen that is not important. So procrastination of sub-hobbies, I recommend it. That's all I'm saying. And there's another thing going on with regard to procrastination, which is new things come along that are better than what you were going to do. And I had one friend professionally who found out I was a model railroader, and we were having a big bonding thing about it. And I said to him, he was an N-scaler, and I said, so have you been collecting, engines and cars to run on your future layout? And he had like 4 and 6-year-old kids at the time. And he said, oh no, he says, I'm not going to touch anything until I'm ready to build, because every year the products get way better than they were the previous year. And boy, was he right. That conversation was like 15 years ago. And now I've got a sub-hobby, which is my N-scale layout boarding room. I'm buying these engines that are incredible. And they didn't exist 15 years ago. They have full sound and all of this amazing running qualities, and they have built-in cable eyes and all this stuff. I just can't believe it. So anyway, that's a good example of procrastination. This is the schedule. This is all the room I had for the Skagit River Bridge. Never let the lack of room stop your ambition. You know, I said that before. But I needed to go from here over the Burlington Yard and cross the Skagit River, but there was no way I was going to ruin the Royal Brome in downtown Seattle, which was at a lower level. So I just put a bracket on the wall and a fake button. And these two bridges, Lee Thwaites was selling because he moved into O-scale, if you know Lee Thwaites. And I was at a swap meet, and he was selling those two things for $25. I said, I'll buy them, you know. These are wood Campbell kits that he built in the 70s or something. They're absolutely gorgeous. And I didn't have to do anything except give him the $25, bring them home, stick them on a bracket, and now I have the crossing of the Skagit River. So look at all the time that I saved from going to that swap. We won't go into the other things I purchased in that. Yeah. And then this is another great example. Robin Peel, who's here in the front row, had the brilliant idea because he was dispatching my layout a few different times, and I had the whole thing backwards. I was going from left to right instead of right to left. And everybody in the room, including the dispatcher, was going crazy trying to reconcile what was happening on the layout with what was on the dispatcher's panel. So he said, you know, we should rotate this. And I said, yeah, we should. We could just rotate. This was the original dispatcher's panel, done with the classic micro mark tape and all that stuff, right? So we could have unscrewed this and rotated the whole thing, but then we would have had to rotate all these individual letters upside down. And so he had the brilliant idea, why not just do a PowerPoint diagram, clip it just put with magnets onto the board and put our magnets on that. Anyway, this is a thing that he just created in the last 3 weeks, which has revolutionized how easy it is to dispatch the railroad because now it's going in the correct direction. It's a basic thing. I really don't know why I did it in the wrong direction in the first place. But anyway, my point is, you know, swap meets and friends are your friends. So now I'm just going to quickly run through, what do we have, 10 minutes left?
Yes.
I'm going to quickly run through Rich Blake's list. I just love this list. Now, the thing is, look at this as I go through this quickly. Think about, could you give a clinic on any of these topics? And if you could, volunteer to do so, because we all need to learn from you about the learning curve on that particular topic. Layout construction has a whole bunch of features, and this was my earlier version of the same layout, which was in a single-car garage in Ballard, but I had a lift-up bridge here, and I had a drop-down bridge here, and you had to do both of those things to get into the garage, but then when you flipped it up, you would just hope there wasn't a fire, because it would take you a while to get out. And then this is modular bench work, which is just the idea that even though I was building a permanent layout, I was using 8-foot sheets of plywood, right? So at the joints between the 8-foot sheets, I just put in an extra joist and had the L girders change so that I was able to, when we moved from Valley to the house I'm in now, I was able to actually move the sections of yard. And so I didn't have to rebuild the Inner Bay yard because I had already built it once in Ballard, and I could just reconstruct the layout around because there was reasonably modular bench work. This isn't the same as modules. I mean, modules is even better. But, and then this is a picture of my son's room where I've been storing the extra cars that I've purchased recently that I haven't had time to onboard. So that's getting to be a bit of a problem. Although those are all very cool cars that I'm looking forward to buying. Trackwork, you know, I talked about the 3-week rule, which is arbitrary. It's just, you know, knowing when to quit before it eats you up. I procrastinated for about 15 years building a dual gauge crossing over the main line here, because I couldn't figure out what to do. It was a curved main line and a straight dual gauge track. You see that in the distance there? And finally one day, I decided I would just stop procrastinating, and I started working on it, and I kept track of the time, and it took me about 20 hours to scratch build this, and it works fine. You know, I mean, it's just a project. But it took about 20 hours over 3 weeks, and I was thinking about all these other things I could do now that I was in a mode of scratch build and track. But I thought, no, just call it good and move on. Get back to, the main goal. I'm just going to spend 5 minutes whipping through these topics. You can read the things on here, but each one of them, we could have a clinic on any one of those things. And this is a picture of a ground throw that I saw recently at a layout tour. It's just a simple slide switch with a rod going to the fascia, and this going up to a tube that goes right up to the turnout mechanism. This was just the simplest version of this I'd ever seen in my life. Now, scenery, where do we start? Where do we finish? Rich has a great sense of humor, so he went down deciduous trees, evergreen, palm trees, and shoe trees. That's pretty fun. This is a scene on my layout where I had a curved trestle that I wanted to build. All of this was built about 20 years ago. It occurred to me I didn't have time to build the trestle at the moment, so why don't I just put a piece of plywood across here, thin plywood, and stick a couple of barbecue skewers to hold it up, and put down a piece of the dowel, because I was going to hide it with fir trees anyway. So there it is. It's been there for 20 years. And the main reason I wanted to show you this picture is because of how good the rusted wheels look. Even if they're too rusted. I mean, if that was shiny, it would ruin the whole thing. But this being a piece of plywood doesn't ruin it. It's the wheels you're looking at. Yeah, there's a lot of subjects on scenery. There was an article recently in one of the magazines about you could take a model airplane, cut it right down the center line, and glue it onto your backdrop. And so then you have the plane sticking out of the black backdrop, and it doesn't look weird because the other side of the plane is visible. Each to his own. I think that would look weird. You have a model, what can we say about all these topics? I like the idea of putting in a thunderstorm circuit. That you might be able to do that in 3 weeks, right? You got to have the sound, flashing light. That would be something you might be able to do.
You can buy it for
You can buy one now, right? Vehicles is always an interesting thing. Some really good layouts have a lot of great vehicles. I was just recently, for the first time, at Roy Cutler's layout in Tacoma. And he's really into vehicles, in N-scale. He has all these, everywhere you look, there are N-scale vehicles that really add to the realism of the layout. Roads not taken.
Yeah.
I have a great video here. I don't think it doesn't work.
Little freight cars out of big ones?
Yeah, making little pieces of concrete out of big ones.
You're on the right class. You got it.
So this is Tim Smith demolishing a piece of standard grout pavement that we had made a couple of years before. Don't use standard grout for roads, because if you want to make a change, you're doing that. Now what this video doesn't show is that all those bangs were derailing all the cars in my hidden staging yard, which was right back there. Damn, that really was an expensive, time-consuming project. Of course, buildings is a whole other sub-hobby, which is incredibly fun and rewarding. This is what the reason Tim was demolishing this was because he's mocking up this structure. I showed you this earlier. This is the cement plant that we haven't finished, and he's working on it, which makes me very, very happy. And then, of course, there's electrical. There's a difference between electrical and electronic, but if you can see behind in the shade there, you see that stuff there? So that's a very, very simple patch board that I made. Instead of LCC, remember I spent 3 weeks on LCC and stopped? All I really wanted was to put signals indicating turnout position at these 3 ends of the Y. And I realized, what was I thinking? I already had tortoise switch machines that have contacts, and I could just set it up with LEDs, and I have my little signals. So I just built a patch board and ran the wires to the correct things. And this was much easier than trying to figure out how to program SCC to do it. And then, of course, electronics and software, I don't even know where to start talking about. It's so advanced. I have a diagram of all of the electronic components on my railroad, and with an asterisk on which one is subject to firmware updates. And you just end up turning into an electronics technician because a lot of these pieces of equipment sometimes need their firmware updated, and it's just a nightmare. And then, of course, now I'm also getting into throttles. So we used to have just the NCE throttles, but now we have the proto throttles and the TCS throttles. And the TCS throttles work off Wi-Fi, and the proto throttles have their own transceiver that connects, both of them connect back into the NCE system. But that means I'm maintaining 3 different radio frequency systems to have 3 different types of throttles. I mean, why am I doing this? I have no idea. But anyway, the point is it's a very complicated subject. And then painting and weathering is also very involved in terms of all the different media we can use and different types of colors. I wanted to show you this really cool thing that Eric Van Leist did, if it works. Might work. Right. On the side of the desk.
Isn't that?
Now, how about that? That's a paint storage vertically done with a couple of drawer slides. That's his desk, but I mean, but that really is cool. And then, of course, there's prototype history. We're here at the museum, and there's a million clinics you could do. The picture in the background is Robin and I went up to Orcas Island, demolished the train layout. I think Robin's in that picture. I think that is Robin right here. But we demolished the guy's train layout that he had built over 20 years in 5 hours.
Yep.
It took us to take the whole thing down. Unbelievable. So, in conclusion, model railroading is fun. Here's the prototype bulkhead down at Carkeek Park, and a model of it. It's just so easy to just make a retaining wall look like the real thing. And this is my favorite example. Eric Van Leist took this photograph from the late 1800s, and he built a HO scale replica of the photograph. He's got the same trees, he's got everything.
That is cool.
It's just absolutely amazing. And then 3 years later, he decided to move and tore the whole thing down. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about rolling stock. I've talked about Restraint here today. This is a barrel ore car that came out originally in Ontario, Northland, but it started being used for some sort of shipment through the Puget Sound area, because I worked downtown and I used to see it all the time, these cars. And Rapido finally came out with a model of it. And because I'd been looking for 20 years for somebody to make a model of this, so I just bought every one that they made, figuring they'll never make it again. Then after they did that in Asia, they built them in Mansfield, so now I had to buy a bunch of it. I have a serious restraint problem. That's why I'm here to talk about it. This is the 12-step program. Operations, we've talked about operations, and there's so many aspects to that. Scott Calvert in Vancouver, BC, is the prime example of somebody who's really perfected designing an operating plan. This shows not only the string diagram of the trains, but it shows who's got what train, who's running what train. So this is the operators across the side. And when we do operations, if somebody's free, we give them another train. We don't have a plan like that. But my final quotes are, first of all, Steve DiPolo. If you don't already have a layout, you probably won't. Have you heard him say that? I never saw an engine. And by the way, that quote, what it's based on is, if you're a model railroader, you've probably been making a model railroad all your life. And if you decide to retire and build one, it's not that likely because you're starting from scratch with all of these sub-hobbies. But whereas, I and many of you have been practicing all these sub-hobbies for many, many decades. I never saw an engine, train, or track that I didn't want to model. That's a quote from me. To want is to be alive. I read somewhere, I don't know who said it, But wanting is a natural human thing, so that's why we have to practice all these things and habits and experience and everything else. My father used to say, all I want for my birthday is time, and I never knew what he was saying. I thought he was kind of a kook. You know? And now this is all I ever said.
You know.
And of course, you know, this is something I say. I never put a car in my layout unless the wheels are rusted. And the other thing we do in our weekly meetings is whenever we decide we want to do something, we plan to build it in a certain year. But it's always not this year. It's a future year. We're not saying we don't want to do it. We're just saying we're not going to do it today. It's the triage thing again. And of course, if any of you have been into therapy or whatever, you know that, well, I care about this in 6 months is a major anxiety prevention mantra that you could keep asking yourself. Don't worry, you know, am I going to care about this? So that's my presentation. And if we had time, we could talk about how you stay focused, but we don't because it's time for lunch. So I hope
Thank you. That's enough.
Burr, what do you do with your free time?
He
dances.
dance and play the piano.
posts videos on YouTube.
Another quote I like is, I spent most of my money on trains, the rest I just wasted.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good one. Yeah. It's cool. Yeah, I played that too.